The message crackled through the galaxy like a death knell, a chilling, emotionless broadcast that cut across every channel, every frequency. The Galactic Empire had done the unthinkable. Hundreds of human children had been taken, snatched from their homes on Earth. The horror of the announcement hung in the air like a thick fog, spreading confusion, disbelief, and then, quickly, a seething fury. The human children, no older than 10, were now prisoners in the hands of an empire that had never known mercy. No explanation was given, no justification offered, just an icy declaration that they were being held in an unknown location, their futures held hostage by an empire that saw them as nothing more than pawns in a cruel game. Earth stood on the precipice of something no one had thought possible in the 3,000 years since the last war, a war that had been the final chapter in humanity's violent history. Peace had been a hard-won prize, something the human race had never taken for granted. But now, that peace was shattered, its fragility exposed by an act so vile, so grotesque, that every human across the globe could feel the burning rage rise within them. In the heart of Earth's capital, at the Grand Council chamber, leaders from all corners of the planet gathered in tense silence. The faces that had once known only the calm of diplomacy were now etched with the rawness of emotion. The ambassador of Earth, a man who had spent his life securing peace, stood rigid before them. His normally composed demeanor had cracked. His voice was hoarse as he spoke, barely containing the rage building inside him. "We cannot let this stand," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of an entire species' outrage. "We cannot let them take our children and walk away unchallenged." Behind him, the massive holoscreen displayed the faces of the leaders from the Galactic Empire, their expressions indifferent, their words as cold as their actions. The message had been short, devoid of empathy, devoid of anything that might have resembled remorse. "We have taken the children of Earth. Any attempt to reclaim them will result in the destruction of your planet's most revered monument. Proceed at your own risk." The message ended as abruptly as it began, leaving only the empty void of space in its wake. No threats, no demands, just a chilling declaration of power. The Earth Council was in turmoil. The voices of reason were being drowned out by the cries for vengeance. Humanity's warriors, long kept in check by peace, felt the bloodlust begin to stir within them again. The families of the children taken were beyond reason. Mothers screamed. Fathers clenched their fists, the weight of powerlessness nearly breaking them. But it was the children's grandparents, the last living survivors of the wars that had nearly destroyed Earth, who spoke the hardest truth. "We cannot fight," one of them said, his voice carrying the pain of generations. "Not again. We have worked for peace our entire lives." And yet, despite the words of caution, the truth was undeniable. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Empire had crossed a line, one that no diplomat could undo. They had taken children, the innocent, the future, and they had done so without even a second thought. And in doing so, they had provoked a response far beyond their expectations. As the council debated, a single, harrowing thought began to settle into every human's mind. The galaxy had just witnessed the moment when humanity would break its 3,000-year peace. It wasn't just the children who had been taken. It was the last shred of humanity's innocence, and with it, the final straw. For every person on Earth, there was only one path forward now. There could be no negotiation, no more words. Humanity would make the galaxy remember just who they had provoked. The war had begun. The quiet hum of the council chamber was drowned out by the roar of angry voices as the Earth leaders argued amongst themselves. It had only been hours since the transmission from the Galactic Empire, but already the world was shifting. Once proud diplomats, men and women who had spent their lives building the fragile peace, now stood on the brink of something far darker. Peace was never supposed to be fragile. Ambassador Nolan's voice cut through the chaos, his eyes locked on the holographic projection of the Galactic Empire's leaders. His fingers trembled slightly as he pointed to their blank faces. "Look at them. They don't care. They see us as nothing more than a nuisance, a speck in the vastness of the universe." The weight of his words hung in the air. The very foundation of human diplomacy had been built on the ideal that reason, not violence, would win the day. But this was different. Humanity had been pushed beyond the breaking point. In the farthest reaches of Earth's orbit, the mighty fleets of the Galactic Empire loomed like a constant threat, silent, menacing, and, until now, untouchable. The Empire had never known fear. They had never been challenged by anyone, let alone a species that had once been at war with itself. But now, in the cold vacuum of space, humanity's greatest strength had been pushed to its limits. Within the council chamber, debates over retaliation grew more heated by the second. Some advocated for diplomatic solutions, desperate to salvage peace at any cost. Others, the warriors, the generals, the veterans, saw the truth. They knew that diplomacy would never work. The Empire had tested the boundaries of human endurance, and they had failed to see the consequences. The once renowned General Allison stood at the back of a room, her arms folded, her face set in a mask of steely resolve. She had been a part of the last war, a war that had nearly shattered humanity into oblivion. But she was no fool. She had seen the way people looked at her, the war-torn veterans, the soldiers who had lost everything. They all knew one thing: peace had failed. "Every day we delay is a day that we let them win," General Allison said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She strode forward, her presence commanding attention. "You all speak of peace, but I see no peace in the faces of those whose children have been taken. I see no peace in the eyes of those who fought for the future of this planet. We have been betrayed, and now it is time to respond." The silence that followed her words was deafening. The other members of the council shifted uncomfortably, knowing that there was no easy answer. Peace had been their path for millennia. But now, the idea of war was starting to seem like the only solution. "General," a council member, Minister Armitage, said softly, his voice laced with apprehension, "we cannot simply jump into war. The Empire is vast. They have weapons, resources beyond our comprehension. We would be outmatched." Outmatched? General Allison's voice was low, almost a growl. "For 3,000 years, we've built our strength in silence. They have no idea what we're capable of." She turned to the hologram of the Empire's leaders, her gaze hardening. "If we are to fight, we fight with everything we have." Her words were a declaration, a challenge, and the room knew it. It wasn't long before the decision was made. The ambassadors and council members, who had once worked tirelessly to maintain peace, now understood that no amount of negotiation, no amount of pleading, could undo what had been done. The human race would respond, and they would respond with a fury the Empire had never seen. Outside, in the streets of Earth's major cities, the call for vengeance had already begun. Protesters, parents, soldiers, every person on Earth felt the same swelling tide of rage. Banners waved. Children's names were shouted in anger. The streets buzzed with rumors of military mobilizations, of plans being drawn up in secrecy. The world was about to awaken from its long slumber of peace, and the Empire would feel the weight of its mistake. Meanwhile, deep within the vast, ancient halls of the Galactic Empire's Central Command, Emperor Azric watched Earth's reaction with a cold smirk. His plans had been set into motion with precision, but he underestimated one thing: the sheer, relentless will of humanity. And while he stood confident in the might of his empire, the flicker of doubt in his eyes betrayed his understanding of one undeniable truth. The human spirit was not so easily crushed. From the highest echelons of power to the common people, the call for war echoed across Earth. The fleet, once disbanded, was now being reassembled. Every weapon that had been carefully stored away for 3 millennia was now brought to the forefront, ready for the first strike in a conflict that would shape the future of the galaxy. It wasn't long before the world's most seasoned military leaders gathered in secret. They had one task: to prepare humanity's response. The galaxy would soon know what it meant to provoke a species that had endured so much and was now ready to unleash its full wrath. The first fleets began to form. Massive ships, each bristling with weapons and carrying the determination of millions, gathered in Earth's orbit. Humanity had waited long enough. And when the first shots were fired, the galaxy would remember this moment. The day Earth, the home of a species known for its resilience, declared war on the Galactic Empire. The stars had never seemed so cold. As Earth's fleet moved into formation, the eerie silence of space was broken only by the hum of ships preparing for battle. The galaxy, once so vast and indifferent, now seemed to shrink in anticipation. Humanity had chosen its path, and there was no turning back. The first wave of ships was already en route, carrying not just the weight of their weapons, but the collective fury of a species that had been pushed too far. In the heart of Earth's military command center, General Allison stood before a massive holographic display, her face set in grim determination. The final preparations were being made. No more negotiations. No more appeals to reason. The Empire had made its move, and now Earth would make its own. The fate of the kidnapped children was in their hands, and that responsibility was not one they would take lightly. "All ships report ready for combat," came the crisp voice of Admiral Tatum, the fleet commander. His expression mirrored that of every officer in the room, stoic, unflinching. The time for diplomacy had ended. The time for war had arrived. General Allison nodded, her fingers tracing the hologram of the Empire's defense grid. The Galactic Empire's fleets were vast, their ships equipped with advanced technology that far surpassed anything Earth had ever built. But what they lacked, what they could never replicate, was the human spirit, the relentless drive to protect those they loved, to fight for their own. "We will strike hard," General Allison said, her voice carrying through the room. "No mercy, no hesitation. We're not just fighting for the children we've lost. We're fighting for every soul on this planet who still believes in the strength of humanity. We will show them what happens when they cross us." The room fell silent. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of steady breathing. Everyone understood the magnitude of the situation. They were no longer just soldiers or diplomats. They were the last line of defense for a world that had known peace for far too long. And now, they were willing to break that peace to ensure the survival of their future. As the fleet neared the Galactic Empire's outer defenses, the tension was palpable. Earth's forces, once seen as a fragmented collection of nations, had now unified under a single banner. The first wave of warships, including the newly designed Vanguard-class dreadnoughts, carried cutting-edge weapons, missiles capable of piercing even the toughest shields, and energy beams strong enough to shatter hulls with a single strike. But more importantly, each ship carried something the Empire had failed to account for, the unyielding will of a planet that had nothing left to lose. Admiral Tatum's voice cut through the silence once more. "We've breached the outer perimeter, preparing for engagement." The fleet surged forward, a coordinated wave of death and retribution. In the distance, the massive form of an Empire cruiser came into view, its sleek design a testament to centuries of military dominance. But as the human ships closed in, it was clear that the Empire's arrogance had clouded their judgment. They had underestimated Earth's resolve. The first shots rang out in the dark void of space, bright streaks of energy clashing with the Empire's formidable shields. The battle had begun. On the bridge of the Hercules, General Allison watched as the holograms of enemy ships flickered in and out of view. Her mind raced, calculating the odds, anticipating every move the Empire might make. But there was one thing she knew for certain. They would not stop until the Empire felt the full force of humanity's wrath. "Target their engines," she commanded, her voice cold and steady. "Disable their ability to retreat. No survivors." The Hercules weapons fired in synchronized precision. First, the energy beams. Then, the missiles. Each impact sent shockwaves through the hulls of enemy ships, disintegrating armor and sending debris into the void. The Empire's ships retaliated, returning fire with devastating force. But for every shot they landed, humanity's resolve grew stronger. They were not afraid. They were not backing down. Elsewhere in the fleet, Lieutenant Parker, a young officer who had only recently joined the military, found himself at the controls of a Vanguard-class destroyer. His fingers trembled slightly as he gripped the controls, but his eyes were steady, focused. The faces of the children, his own little sister among them, flashed in his mind. He would not fail them. Not today. Sir, we've breached their shields. Weapons are locked onto their main reactor, Parker called out to his commanding officer. Take the shot, Lieutenant, came the reply. With a deep breath, Parker pressed the final command. The ship's weapon systems hummed, then erupted in a devastating beam that struck the Empire cruiser dead center. The explosion that followed lit up the darkness, a violent burst of energy that rippled outward, taking the massive ship with it. Direct hit. Parker's voice rang out in triumph, though it was laced with grim satisfaction. One down. Keep moving, the commander barked. We've got a long way to go. The Empire, now realizing that this was not a fleeting skirmish, but the beginning of a full-scale war, scrambled to retaliate. Waves of reinforcements poured in, but the human fleet was relentless, pressing forward with no hesitation. Above it all, General Allison watched, her expression hardening as the battle raged. This is only the beginning, she murmured to herself. The Empire will learn soon enough that they've made a grave mistake. Far above Earth, in the distant reaches of space, the Imperial Command was beginning to realize the scale of the conflict they had just ignited. They had expected an easy conquest, an insignificant species to crush with little resistance. But what they faced now was a war unlike any they had ever known. A war with humanity. The stench of burning metal and scorched plasma lingered in the cold, sterile air of the command deck. The battle had raged for hours, and the once pristine hulls of Earth's fleet were now marred with battle scars, evidence of the fierce retaliation from the Galactic Empire. Yet, despite the losses, humanity pressed on. They had struck a blow, but it was only the beginning. Now Earth's forces were pushing deeper into enemy territory, the heart of the Empire now within their grasp. General Allison's gaze fixed on the holographic display in front of her, her mind working through every possibility. The fleet had breached the first line of Imperial defenses, but the Empire had regrouped, and now they were facing the full wrath of the Empire's war machine. Thousands of warships, some as large as entire cities, loomed on the edge of the battlefield. Every ship in Earth's fleet was engaged, its crew on edge, knowing the odds were stacked against them. We've broken through their first defense, but the second wave is heavier, Admiral Tatum reported, his voice steady, though there was a note of concern. We need reinforcements, or we won't make it through this. Allison's jaw clenched. Reinforcements were on the way, but time was running out. The Empire was formidable, their fleets seemingly endless, but it was not their numbers that worried her. It was the realization that the Empire would stop at nothing to crush them, to make an example of humanity. This was no longer just a rescue mission for the kidnapped children. It had become a fight for survival, a war that could change the course of history. How long until we're in range of the capital ship? Allison asked, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the map of enemy forces. 30 minutes, came the reply from her tactical officer. If we can hold the line until then, we'll have a chance to land a decisive blow. Allison nodded, her mind already calculating the risks. The capital ship, the heart of the Empire's fleet, was their ultimate target. Taking it down would cripple the Empire's command structure and throw their entire fleet into chaos. But getting there meant fighting through a wall of destruction, facing down some of the Empire's most advanced warships. Prepare all ships for a coordinated attack, she ordered, her voice sharp. Target their flagship first. No distractions. We take them down, or we don't come back. As the command was passed down, the human fleet adjusted its formations, weapons primed and ready. Outside the ship, the dark void of space shimmered with distant stars, but in the immediate vicinity, the warships were locked in a deadly dance. Massive energy blasts lit up the blackness as the two sides clashed, their weapons a blur of deadly light. On the bridge of the Hercules, Allison stood stoic, watching the battle unfold on the screen before her. She had known that war would come to Earth, but she hadn't expected it to be this brutal. The sheer scale of the conflict was unlike anything they had trained for. But that didn't matter now. Humanity had been pushed too far. And this was their moment to fight back. "We've got incoming," Lieutenant Parker called out from his station, his voice tight with urgency. "A wave of Empire destroyers. They're closing in fast." "Hold your ground," Allison commanded. "Fire at will." The Hercules rocked as its weapon systems discharged, sending torrents of energy and projectiles toward the approaching enemy. The enemy ships retaliated almost instantly, their return fire lighting up the space around them in a dazzling display of destruction. "Shields holding at 50%, the ship's engineer reported. "We can't keep this up for long." "We don't need to hold for long," Allison said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "We just need to make it through to their flagship. Once we take that down, the rest will follow." But even as she spoke, the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. The Empire was relentless. Each ship they destroyed seemed to be replaced by two more, and their advanced weaponry was beginning to take a toll on Earth's fleet. The Hercules was already showing signs of wear, and there were murmurs among the crew about damage control, about how much longer they could keep fighting. And then, the unthinkable happened. The Hercules shuddered violently as an explosion rocked the ship's starboard side. Sparks flew from the walls, and alarms blared throughout the bridge. The lights flickered, casting the crew in eerie shadows. "Damage report," Allison shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. "We've lost power to the starboard engines," came the frantic response from the engineering officer. "Hull integrity at 60%. We're losing pressure in several sectors." Allison gritted her teeth. She had expected losses, but this was different. They had barely made it past the first wave of Empire forces, and now their flagship was vulnerable. There was no time to hesitate. They had to keep pressing forward. The children's lives depended on it. "Deploy the emergency shields," she ordered, "and get those engines back online, or we're dead in the water." But the damage was worse than they had anticipated. The ship was sluggish, unable to keep up with the rest of the fleet, which was now surging ahead toward the Imperial capital ship. "We can't stay in the fight," Parker said, his voice laced with fear. "If we don't retreat now, we'll be sitting ducks." General Allison looked out at the vast expanse of space, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. The human fleet was still moving forward. They were still fighting. But now she had a choice: retreat and regroup, or risk everything on a final, desperate strike. She knew the cost. But she also knew one thing: humanity had never been a species to turn its back on a fight. "Pull us back into formation," she said, her voice resolute. "We're going all in. This ends today." The Hercules rumbled as it surged forward once more, joined by the rest of Earth's fleet. The Empire had made a grave mistake, and humanity was about to show them the true cost of underestimating them. The tipping point had come, and there was no turning back. The stars seemed to flicker out as the Hercules broke through the final line of defense, the capital ship of the Galactic Empire looming in the distance, like a beast hungry for its prey. The warships of Earth's fleet moved in unison, their weapons charged and their hulls battered but unyielding. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and now there would be no mercy. General Allison stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the approaching behemoth. The ship's massive form dominated the view screen, its hull lined with heavily fortified turrets and defensive shields that rippled like waves of energy. Yet, despite the overwhelming power of the Imperial flagship, Allison felt no fear, only a burning determination. "This is it," she said, her voice low but filled with the resolve of 100 generations of humanity. "We either win here or we don't leave." Her command crew moved with practiced precision, coordinating each maneuver with deadly efficiency. Lieutenant Parker, his face drawn with exhaustion, relayed orders to the fleet, while Admiral Tatum's voice cut through the chaos, directing the remaining ships into formation. "Focus all firepower on their main reactor," Allison barked, her mind already anticipating the next move. "We need to cripple their power source before they can retaliate." The Hercules lurched as its weapons fired in rapid succession, sending a barrage of energy blasts toward the Empire's flagship. The shots connected with the enemy shields, causing massive ripples of distortion, but the shield held, barely. The enemy ship retaliated immediately, sending a wave of plasma fire toward Earth's fleet. It was all-out war now, and there was no turning back. Shields holding at 30%, the engineering officer reported. We're taking heavy damage on the starboard side. Allison didn't flinch. The shields could fail. The hull could break. But as long as they had firepower and the will to fight, they would not back down. Keep pressing forward, she ordered, her voice unwavering. We need to break through their defenses before they can call in reinforcements. Outside, the battle raged. The darkness of space lit up with explosions, streaks of light from laser fire, and the twisted wreckage of destroyed ships floating like shattered remnants of a dying dream. Every human ship, from the smallest frigate to the largest destroyer, was fully engaged, every crew member pushed to their limits. The Empire was fighting back with everything they had, but there was something different about the human resolve. They would rather die fighting than surrender. And then, just as the Hercules neared the flagship, a fresh wave of Imperial warships dropped out of hyperspace, their sheer numbers swelling the battlefield. No, Allison whispered. The Empire had just called in reinforcements. Hundreds of ships. Too many to fight head-on. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was an execution. Admiral Tatum, we need to pull back. Parker shouted, panic creeping into his voice. We can't keep this up much longer. If we don't retreat now, we'll lose everything. The words were a bitter truth, but the realization had already struck. The enemy was too powerful, and the human fleet was too battered. If they stayed, they would be wiped out in moments. There was only one choice now, retreat. Retreat isn't an option, Allison said firmly, her gaze never leaving the view screen. We're taking down that flagship. If we fall here, we fall with purpose. Her mind raced, calculating the risk. The reinforcements were too numerous, but if they could target the flagship's weak points, they could disrupt the Empire's command structure and scatter their forces. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. Focus fire on the command center, she ordered. Everything we've got. Take out their leadership. The crew scrambled into action. Weapons aimed, energy pulses charging. The Hercules shuddered again as another blast shook the ship's hull, but they pressed on, pushing forward through the waves of enemy fire. Then, the unthinkable happened. A massive blast from the enemy flagship struck the Hercules head-on, ripping through the ship's shields and tearing through the armor beneath. Sparks flew, alarms screamed, and for a moment, everything went dark. The entire bridge went silent as everyone braced for impact. We've lost power to the forward engines, the engineer called out. Hull integrity is down to 15%. We're not going to make it if we don't pull back now. The ship groaned as another hit struck, this time sending a shockwave that rattled through every bulkhead. It was clear, the Hercules was not going to survive this fight. The battle had shifted too much in favor of the Empire. But Allison would not retreat. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. Give me a direct line to all ships, she ordered, voice cutting through the chaos. Now, the bridge crew quickly patched through the signal, and within seconds, Allison's voice boomed over the comms, reaching every ship in the fleet. All ships, listen up. We've lost the Hercules, but we are not lost. We've come this far, and we're going to finish this. Target their command center, every last one of you. We take down their leadership, and we shatter their will to fight. A roar of affirmation echoed from the fleet's remaining ships, and for the first time, Allison saw the flicker of doubt in the eyes of the Empire soldiers. The enemy flagship's power flickered as a coordinated strike from Earth's remaining ships hit its command center directly. The shield shimmered, cracking under the pressure, and then, with an ear-splitting explosion, the flagship's central reactor erupted in a brilliant burst of fire. The Empire's reinforcements, thrown into chaos by the loss of their flagship, faltered. The human fleet, battered but unyielding, pressed on, breaking through the disarray with renewed vigor. We've done it, Parker shouted, a note of disbelief in his voice. Allison allowed herself a brief smile. The war was far from over, but humanity had taken the first, vital step toward victory. They had struck at the heart of the Empire, and it had begun to bleed. The battle was far from won, but Earth had proven something the Empire could no longer ignore. Humanity would not be broken. The last stand had begun, and it was the beginning of the end for the Galactic Empire. The silence that followed the destruction of the Imperial flagship was deafening. For a brief moment, the battlefield stilled. The chaos of war seemed to pause, as if the universe itself held its breath in disbelief. But General Allison knew this was only the calm before the storm. The Empire was wounded, but not defeated. "We struck a blow," Allison muttered, her eyes scanning the flickering viewscreen, where the wreckage of the enemy flagship drifted like a tombstone in the dark expanse of space. But the war's far from over. Her voice barely rose above the low hum of the bridge, but it was enough to stir her crew into motion. Lieutenant Parker worked his station with unflinching precision, coordinating the remaining fleet members as they regrouped and assessed their next move. "All ships, status report," Allison ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. The faces around her were pale, their eyes weary from the intensity of the battle. Yet there was something else, something in their expressions that told her they were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for revenge. "Admiral Tatum reports all ships are still operational, but we've sustained heavy losses," Parker responded. "We've got 30% of our forces remaining, but it's enough to push forward." The relief in her chest was brief. Humanity had fought with everything it had, and the Empire had felt the sting. But Allison knew better than to let the brief victory lull her into complacency. The Empire was not one to bow easily, and there was still much more to fight for. "Prepare for the next phase," she ordered, her voice ablade. "We are not retreating. We're pressing our advantage. We finish this now." As if on cue, the fleet shifted into motion, their weapon systems recharged, engines humming with the same furious energy they'd had when they first set sail toward the heart of the Empire. The human fleet's resolve had hardened into something unshakable. They had faced overwhelming odds, seen their comrades fall, but they had also shattered the core of the enemy's power. And that taste of victory burned hot in their veins. But as they moved forward, Allison's thoughts were clouded with the grim knowledge of what lay ahead. The Galactic Empire had deep pockets and even deeper resources. They would rebuild quickly. They would retaliate with a fury that could consume everything in its path. The stars outside seemed to mock her. Their calmness in the face of all this destruction was both a comfort and a curse. There was no rest here, no time for mourning. The cost of victory had already been paid in the blood of hundreds, if not thousands, of brave souls who had given everything for this moment. "General," came the voice of Lieutenant Yu, one of the bridge officers. "We've received a transmission from the Imperial High Command. They're threatening total destruction of Earth if we don't surrender." Allison's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. "They think they can scare us. We've already shown them what happens when they push too far. Prepare for their response." The message crackled to life on the viewscreen, showing a shadowed figure, an Imperial officer, dressed in the traditional dark armor of the Empire's military elite. His expression was cold, calculating, but there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes. "Humanity," the officer's voice echoed through the bridge, a low growl of menace. "You have made a grave mistake. You think this will end with your Pyrrhic victory? You are fools. You will pay the price. Earth will burn." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving only the low hum of static in its wake. Allison's eyes narrowed. The officer had spoken the truth. The Empire would not give up easily. If humanity was to survive this, they would have to push forward, through the very heart of the storm. The war was not about to end. No, this was the beginning of something darker, more violent than anything they had faced. "Prepare the fleet," she ordered, her voice cold with the weight of what was coming. "We will not surrender. Not now, not ever. We will break them." As the words left her lips, she felt the full weight of her responsibility pressed down on her. She was not just commanding a fleet. She was leading humanity's fight for survival. Every life lost in this war would be on her conscience. And yet, She knew that if they did not fight now, if they did not push the Empire to the brink, the cost would be far greater. The threat the Empire posed to Earth, to humanity itself, was something that could not be ignored. For a long moment, the only sound was the deep hum of the Hercules' engines, its final charge now underway. Allison's mind raced with strategies, tactics, and contingencies. There was no room for failure. The Empire's warships were gathering again, regrouping, and preparing for the final confrontation. But humanity had already proven its strength. They had proven that they could survive against the impossible. Now, they needed to do more than survive. They needed to win. "Signal the fleet," she said, her voice a steady command. "Let them know this is the final strike. We move in full force. We do not leave a single Imperial ship standing. This ends here." The crew moved swiftly to relay the orders, preparing for the last phase of the battle. It was a brutal, unrelenting war. It was the price humanity had to pay for its survival, and it was a price they were willing to make. Earth's forces would fight until the last ship, until the last soldier. They would break the Empire's will, and in doing so, they would carve their own future in the stars. The battle had only just begun, and this time, humanity would not back down.